I think the fundamental question which we'll be debating in the House of Commons today is, what do we as a nation and as a government, as a parliament, think in principle we should do in the face of this war crime, this atrocity, this crime against humanity, the use of chemical weapons on a very large scale by the Assad regime just a week ago. And I suspect many people who've been watching this terrible bloodshed unfold on their television screens over the last couple of years will say, well, hang on a minute, we haven't done anything until now. Why now is there all this talk from the French and the Americans and the Arab League have come out and said something must be done, and all the European Union countries also say that there should be a serious response? And the answer to that is because the gassing of innocent men, women and children is a particularly heinous crime under international law. It's a flagrant breach of international law. It's a war crime. And it's a breach of a ban on chemical weapons that has been pretty well intact for close to 100 years after they were banned in the 1920s, following the use of chemical weapons in the First World War. And I think the question is, given that we now have Assad using chemical weapons more frequently against his own people, he's done it on several occasions over the last few months, more frequently than any other that we know of, any other state has ever used against their people. How do we react to that? Because the danger of not doing anything, of course, is it sets a precedent. It sends out a very clear message that from now on, basically, despite all the strong words against and all the law against chemical weapons and the humanitarian law that says that we can act, we won't act when that happens. And that is not necessarily, of course, a cost-free option. It might feel like the easy thing to do, but of course we might rue the day in years to come. The flip side, which we'll be debating, is what might be the consequences of taking action, and what our position in the government is there is a principled case to take action which is specific, one-off, and has one sole simple purpose: to deter Assad, and indeed anybody else with chemical weapons, from using them again.
You say using them again, Deputy Prime Minister. In fact, that's 3 times you've said that Assad has definitely fired these chemical weapons. You are wholly convinced of that, are you? And the intelligence that you have had sight of, or the Prime Minister and you have had sight of, wholly convinces you that Assad used these weapons?
Yes, I'm convinced. All the evidence points to...
What evidence?
Well, everything from television pictures to doctors reporting from the Médecins Sans Frontières, the medical charity, saying they're treating people with symptoms, large numbers of people who died and are suffering from symptoms of a chemical attack.
Yes.
And also, crucially, of course, all the evidence, and we will publish the findings of the Joint Intelligence Committee, their key findings, later this morning.
Yes.
All the evidence points in the same direction, namely that the opposition could not have done this. They didn't have control over the chemical stockpiles. They didn't have the weaponry, the artillery, to deliver them in the way that they were delivered. It was in a part of Damascus, an eastern suburb of Damascus, which was being subject to shelling by regime forces for several days before the attack took place, and several days afterwards as well. So all the evidence points to one overwhelming conclusion. The regime having used, by the way, chemical weapons on a much smaller scale on numerous occasions over the last several months. By the way, they brag about having chemical weapons stockpiles. This is not a regime that somehow is hiding this. They say that they brag about the fact they've got chemical weapons stockpiles, and they control them very, very tightly.
This is the key, isn't it, Deputy Prime Minister? Who
Correct.
fired these weapons? And I'm not saying you are wrong, but if it's not them, then this is a totally different situation. This is presumably this intelligence report that's released. This will give us everything we need to know.
What it will say but obviously read it for yourself, is it will say all the evidence points to the fact the opposition could not have done this. There may, for all I know, because bluntly there are elements of the opposition forces we know who are pretty unsavoury characters who might want to use chemical weapons, but all the evidence points to the fact they don't have the capacity, they don't have the control over the chemical weapons stockpiles, they don't have the control over the weaponry to deliver it, and it was in a part of Damascus which, as I say, was being subject to remorseless bombardment by the regime, under attack by the regime, for days before and after the attack.
Mr. Clegg, as and when the vote comes, will you be voting for military action?
I'll be voting for the principle, absolutely, that we need to provide a serious response.
You'll vote for the principle, but then as and when another vote to actually take direct action, you'll vote...
If, as I say, once we've heard from the weapons inspectors, once we've brought this to the UN Security Council, as we've set out in the motion today, if then the case is made that the only way we can respond, the most effective way we can respond in a legal, proportionate and targeted fashion to deter the further use of chemical weapons on humanitarian grounds is a sort of isolated, one-off military initiative, then I will vote for that.
With the UN support? You'd have to have UN support.
No, there are circumstances. If, as I said earlier, if the Russians and the Chinese continue to block a UN decision, which we're seeking from them to secure in the UN, I personally think there are legal and moral and other grounds which would justify taking measures, as I say, to deter on humanitarian grounds, under humanitarian law. And by the way, I think Chris earlier referred to Kosovo. That's precisely the principle, of course, we followed in Kosovo.
You think the military is the solution, then?
No, I'm saying, do I think that there is a case for a one-off military initiative to deter the further use of chemical weapons in this bloody civil war? I think there may well be a case, and I would vote for it if that case is clearly made after the UN process has played itself out. What I have said is the civil war itself is not susceptible to a military solution. As I say, the question you need to ask yourself, and it's one I struggle with, this is not easy. There are no easy answers. There are no magic wand answers to this. There are risks on all sides. Is what risks are you taking for our safety in Britain, on British streets, the world that we will have to inhabit for years to come, if at the first hurdle, this generation of politicians, when they saw chemical weapons being used with unprecedented frequency, we basically said, do you know what? Despite a lot of hand-wringing, there's not much we can do. And that is something which I think it would not rest very easily on my conscience that when faced with that choice, we basically walked on the other side of the road.